In the heart of an alien world, where power and beauty ruled, there lived a tiny princess, smaller than any other of her kind. Her name was Zira, and despite her royal lineage, she was the subject of rejection and scorn from the males of her species. Her delicate frame and soft features made her seem weak in the eyes of the strong, towering aliens that roamed her planet. They saw her as fragile, incapable of standing alongside them, in battle or ruling with the strength they revered. Zira spent her days in isolation, hidden away from the grand halls of her family's palace. The towering alien males, who would come from far and wide to court her, rejected her one by one. They laughed at her size, dismissing her as unworthy of a mate. No one saw her beauty, her wisdom, or her heart. To them, she was nothing more than a disappointment, a princess whose worth could not match the strength of their expectations. But Zira's heart was not defeated. She carried within her a fierce determination to prove that her worth was not measured by size or strength. Her mind was sharp, her spirit unbroken. But no one could see that. Each time an alien suitor rejected her, Zira's heart sank deeper, and a wave of loneliness washed over her. She would stand by her window, staring out into the vast horizon, dreaming of a time when someone would understand her value. The rejection weighed heavily on her spirit. She was still the princess of her people, yet she felt like nothing more than a forgotten creature in the vastness of the universe. She longed for the touch of someone who would see beyond her size, someone who would understand her true worth. It was during one of these quiet moments of reflection that Zira's world was about to change forever. She heard rumors from her guards, whispers of a human, a species from a distant planet. Unlike the proud aliens of her world, humans were known for their kindness and unpredictability. They weren't like the cold, calculating beings who lived on her planet. Little did she know, this human was about to come into her life, and everything was about to shift. Would this human see her for who she truly was? Or would he, too, reject her as the others had? As Zira sat there, lost in thought, she couldn't help but wonder if there was still hope for someone like her. Could the human, a being so different from her kind, be the one to see past her small stature and recognize the strength of her spirit? As Zira sat by the window, lost in her thoughts, a sudden commotion outside broke the silence. The soft hum of the palace's grand hallways gave way to the sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate, and unlike anything she had ever heard before. She glanced up, startled, as the grand doors of her chambers opened, revealing a tall figure framed in the doorway. The sight was unlike any she had seen before. Standing in the threshold was a human, tall and imposing, yet his demeanor was calm and steady. His presence contrasted sharply with the aliens around her. His skin was pale, his features sharp, and his eyes, clear and kind, seemed to look directly at her, cutting through the space between them like a warm breeze. For a moment, Zira froze. There was something different about him, something that made her heart skip a beat. The human, noticing her gaze, did not hesitate. Without a hint of fear or hesitation, he stepped forward into the room. The alien guards near the door whispered in confusion, "The human." In the royal palace, it was unheard of. The princess's gaze shifted to the strange being before her. She had heard tales of humans, of their courage, their unpredictability, and their strange customs, but she never thought she would encounter one, let alone in such a personal way. "Princess Zira," the human said, his voice smooth yet firm. "I've heard your story. I've seen the rejection you faced, but I'm here to offer you something no one else has." Zira's heart raced as she tried to make sense of his words. How does he know my name? How can he understand? The human took another step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "I don't see your size. I don't see weakness. I see a being capable of more than anyone here has ever understood, and I'd like to offer you something." He paused, his tone growing softer. "A chance. A chance to prove that strength doesn't come from size, but from heart." Zira could hardly breathe as his words settled over her. Could it be possible? Could someone, a human, actually see her worth when no one else had. The human smiled, but it wasn't a smile of pity. It was one of genuine warmth and respect. "Would you walk with me, just for a moment?" His invitation was simple, but there was something profound in his eyes. Zira hesitated, the weight of her past rejections still clinging to her. But something stirred within her. Maybe, just maybe, this human was different. She had nothing to lose. With a deep breath, Zira stood from her seat and slowly, cautiously, stepped toward him. The human extended his hand to her, and with a heart full of uncertainty, but also a spark of hope, Zira placed her hand in his. And as their fingers touched, the world around them seemed to hold its breath. Something had shifted. Something was about to change. Zira had no idea what this human wanted from her or what the future would hold, but for the first time in a long while, she felt seen. And for the first time in what seemed like forever, she allowed herself to believe that maybe she could be more than just an outcast. Zira's heart raced as she stood there, her hand in his. The warmth of the human's touch was unlike anything she had ever experienced. It wasn't just the physical warmth, but something deeper, something that made her feel, for the first time, like she truly mattered. The human, still holding her hand, gave her a reassuring smile, one that seemed to melt away some of her doubts. He wasn't like the others, those who had looked past her, those who had dismissed her because of her size or her inability to fit into their world. He saw something in her that no one else had. "I know this may seem strange to you, Princess," the human said, his voice steady, "but I spent my life studying your kind. The way you live, the way you fight, the way you love. I know there's more to you than what the world sees." Zira blinked, trying to process his words. No one had ever spoken to her like this. All her life, she had been pushed aside, seen as weak and unworthy. Even though she was royalty, even though she had the blood of the most powerful aliens running through her veins, it felt like she was nothing. But this human, he made her feel different. He made her feel like she had the power to change everything. "I don't care about the stories," the human continued. "I don't care about what your people believe. I care about you, the person standing right in front of me. And I believe you deserve better than what this world has offered you." Zira felt a lump form in her throat. She could hardly speak, unsure of how to respond. She had always been taught to expect rejection, to expect disappointment. She had built walls around herself, afraid to trust anyone. But this human, this stranger, had somehow cracked through all of that, and she didn't know whether to embrace the hope he offered or push him away to protect herself from further pain. The human seemed to sense her hesitation. "I'm not asking you to leave everything behind. I'm asking you to give me a chance, to give us a chance. I can help you show the galaxy who you really are, Princess. We can change the way the universe sees you. Together." Zira swallowed hard, her mind spinning. This wasn't just an offer to protect her, it was an offer to change everything. The walls she had built around her heart felt suddenly fragile, and a strange warmth began to fill the empty spaces inside her. Could she trust this human? Could she believe that someone, anyone, would be willing to stand by her side without judgment? It felt like an impossible dream, but the sincerity in his eyes made her want to believe. For the first time, she found herself asking the question, "What if?" "What are you asking, exactly?" Zira's voice was shaky, but she was determined to understand. The human smiled, his expression filled with hope. "I'm asking for the chance to walk beside you, to face the challenges ahead, not as a princess and her protector, but as equals. I want to be by your side, not because you need saving, but because you deserve to be seen. Not just as royalty, but as someone worthy of love, respect, and a future of your own choosing." Zira's heart beat faster, the weight of his words sinking in. She had spent so long in the shadows, in the loneliness of rejection. But now, for the first time, she was being offered something she had never dared to dream of, a chance at real love, real partnership. But would she dare take it? She gazed into his eyes, her mind racing, her heart torn between fear and hope. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Say you'll give me the chance, the human said softly, stepping a little closer. Say you'll let me show you a life beyond what you've always known. Say you'll be mine, not as a duty, not as a promise, but as a choice. Zira stood there, frozen in place, her breath shallow. Every instinct told her to retreat, to protect herself from the danger of being hurt again. But every fiber of her being longed to reach out, to take that leap into the unknown. The choice was hers. Would she trust this human and step into a future full of uncertainty, or would she stay in the safety of the familiar but suffocating life she had known? The silence between them stretched, the tension thick, as Zira's mind raced to make a decision. And then, with a deep breath, she made her choice. Zira felt the air grow heavy as she slowly let go of the walls she had built around herself. The weight of her decision felt immense. For so long, she had pushed away any thought of hope, of connection, for fear of disappointment and rejection. But now, standing before this human who had offered her everything, she was faced with a choice that terrified and excited her at the same time. His words echoed in her mind. Say you'll give me the chance. Say you'll let me show you a life beyond what you've always known. Her heart raced, her pulse quickened. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, the hope, the belief that maybe, just maybe, she was worth more than what the galaxy had led her to believe. No one had ever looked at her like that, not even her own people. And the truth stung. She had spent years longing for someone to see her for who she truly was, not just as the princess of a dying empire, but as an individual with desires, dreams, and a need for love. Zira took a tentative step forward. She could feel her breath catch in her throat. Her hands shook, but she forced them to steady. Slowly, she lifted her gaze to meet his. I'll take the chance, she said, her voice quiet but steady. I don't know what this means or where it will lead, but I'm willing to try. The human smiled, his eyes softening with warmth and understanding. He didn't need words. His expression alone said everything. He was ready to walk this journey with her, wherever it may lead. And that was all Zira needed to know. In that moment, something inside her shifted. The heavy burden of loneliness, the isolation that had plagued her for so long, started to lift. It wasn't gone. She wasn't suddenly free from her fears. But for the first time, she didn't feel so alone. There was hope. There was possibility. Are you sure? The human asked, his voice low, as if afraid to push her too far. Zira nodded. Yes, I'm sure. He reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face, his touch sending an unfamiliar warmth through her. It wasn't the touch of a protector or a guardian. It was the touch of someone who cared deeply, someone who wanted to build something real, something lasting. Zira's heart fluttered, her emotions in turmoil. She had spent her life looking for something, some spark of meaning in a world that had never fully embraced her. She had always felt like an outsider, a figure of royalty without the love or respect she had deserved. But now, standing beside this human, the possibility of a different life seemed within reach. We'll figure this out together, the human said, his voice full of resolve. One step at a time. Zira nodded again, her heart swelling with a strange mix of fear and excitement. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in her life, she felt like she was taking control of her own destiny. As they stood there, side by side, the future seemed to stretch before them, full of uncertainty, but also full of promise. For the first time, Zira felt like she wasn't just a pawn in the hands of fate. She was a person, a woman capable of choosing her own path. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid. The journey ahead would be difficult, but with the human by her side, she knew she wouldn't be alone. Together, they would face the trials ahead. Together, they would build something neither of them had ever dreamed possible. Zira took a deep breath and let it out slowly, as if releasing the last of her fears. Whatever came next, she would face it with him. And that, she realized, was the most important thing. The journey had only just begun. Zira and the human, whose name she had learned was Kel, stood in the quiet of the small room, the silence between them filled with the weight of their new reality. Zira's heart was still racing, her emotions tangled in a way she had never experienced before. She had taken a step into the unknown, and now there was no turning back. Kel's presence was calming, yet intense. His steady gaze held hers, as if silently waiting for her to make the next move. She felt vulnerable. An alien princess from a faraway galaxy, standing before a human, choosing to trust him with her heart. It was a risk, a dangerous one, but the way Kale looked at her, so full of kindness and sincerity, made her wonder if it was the right one. She had spent her life under the harsh glare of expectations of duty. As the princess of her people, Zira had been raised to believe she was destined for greatness, for a life governed by duty, by alliances, by power. But none of those things had ever brought her happiness. None of them had ever made her feel truly alive. Her heart had longed for something more than power. It had longed for warmth, for connection, for a kind of love that didn't depend on political games or the expectations of a royal bloodline. And now, in Kel, she saw a glimpse of that. The way he had looked at her, not as a princess to be admired from afar, but as a person, someone worthy of care, of affection. It was a stark contrast to how she had been treated her entire life. She didn't have to be a symbol or a title around him. She could simply be Zira. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Kel's voice broke the silence, his words soft but firm. He was still waiting for her to decide. Zira swallowed hard. It was a question she had asked herself 100 times since their first encounter. Was she ready? Was she ready to step away from the life she knew, the life of royalty, of politics, and walk into something she could never predict? The answer, as much as it terrified her, came more easily than she expected. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but she was sure of one thing. She couldn't go back to the way things were. The coldness of her palace, the loneliness of her crown, all felt so distant now, so irrelevant. What mattered now was this moment, this choice. Zira nodded, meeting his gaze with newfound determination. "I want to try, Kale. I don't know what will happen, but I want to see where this can go. I want to know what it feels like to trust someone, to be more than just a princess." Kale smiled, and it was as if the weight of her words had settled in him too. "You don't have to be anything but yourself. You don't have to be anyone but the woman I'm getting to know." Zira felt a warmth spread in her chest, and it wasn't from the physical proximity between them. It was a warmth that came from somewhere deep inside her, a sense of peace, a sense of belonging. For the first time in her life, she felt seen, truly seen. Kale extended his hand to her, palm open, waiting. The gesture was simple, but it meant everything. The invitation to walk with him, to be with him, to share the journey. She didn't hesitate. She took his hand, feeling the strength and reassurance in his grasp. "We'll take it one step at a time," Kale said, as if reading her thoughts. "And whatever happens, I'll be right beside you." Zira gave a small, shaky laugh. "One step at a time. That sounds right." For a moment, they stood there, hand in hand, unsure of where this path would lead but certain of one thing. They were no longer facing it alone. As they made their way toward the door, Zira couldn't help but feel a strange sense of excitement and fear mingling inside her. The world outside was vast, full of danger and uncertainty, but for the first time, she felt a spark of hope. And that spark, she realized, was enough to keep going. As days passed, Zira found herself slowly adjusting to the unfamiliar life she now shared with Kale. They traveled together, moving through quiet villages and rugged landscapes, always avoiding the larger cities where she might be recognized as royalty. Her past was a shadow that seemed to follow her, but with every mile it became a little more distant, a little more faded. Zira's thoughts, however, were never far from the choices she had made. The weight of responsibility still clung to her. She had been a princess, A leader, someone who had once commanded respect and fear. Now, all of that was behind her, and yet she couldn't completely escape it. She could no longer deny that she had duties to her people, even though she had chosen to walk away from them. Kale had been understanding. He never pushed her to speak of her past unless she was ready, but he also noticed the way her gaze sometimes grew distant when she thought no one was watching. He saw the struggle within her, the battle between the woman she was becoming and the one she had once been. One evening, as they sat by a campfire, Zira found herself lost in thought again. Kale, ever perceptive, gently broke the silence. "You're thinking about your people, aren't you?" he asked, his voice soft and steady. Zira sighed, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the edge of her cup. "I can't help it. I left everything behind when I chose to be with you, but there's still a part of me that feels like I've abandoned them. My people need me. They've always needed me." Kale looked at her with a quiet understanding. "And you feel torn between who you were and who you're becoming now?" Zira nodded slowly, her eyes lowering to the fire. "I don't know if I'm strong enough to let go of my old life, but I can't go back to it. Not after everything that's happened." Kale was silent for a long moment. Then he leaned forward, his expression firm yet gentle. "Zira, your strength isn't defined by your title. It's defined by the choices you make now, the person you choose to be today. You don't have to carry the weight of your past with you. You can forge a new path, one where you can still be a leader, but in a way that reflects who you are now." His words were simple, but they held so much truth. Zira felt a wave of emotion rise in her chest. The weight that had been pressing down on her heart suddenly felt a little lighter. She had spent so much time worrying about what she had left behind, about the responsibilities that still lingered. But Kel's words reminded her that she didn't have to live in the shadow of her past forever. "Thank you," she whispered, looking up at him with gratitude. "I've been so afraid of making the wrong choice. But maybe I don't have to choose between my old life and this one. Maybe I can create something new, something that's truly mine." Kale smiled, the warmth in his eyes matching the glow of the fire. "I believe you can, and I'll be right here, every step of the way." Zira felt a strange sense of peace wash over her. For the first time, she didn't feel alone in this journey. She had Kel by her side, and with his unwavering support, maybe, just maybe, she could learn to be the leader her people needed, but also the woman she was always meant to be. As the fire crackled and the stars twinkled above, Zira realized that her future was still unwritten. And that thought, instead of frightening her, gave her the freedom to move forward. She was ready to take the next step. The days turned into weeks, and Zira found herself adjusting to a new rhythm of life. The constant feeling of running from her past had slowly faded into something more manageable, though never entirely gone. The fear of what awaited her if she returned to her kingdom was still a shadow she couldn't shake off. But with Kale by her side, she felt something new emerging, a sense of purpose she hadn't had before. One morning, as they traveled through a dense forest, Zira felt an undeniable pull in her heart. It was as if her mind and body were sensing something she hadn't quite realized until that moment. Kale noticed the sudden change in her, the way she paused and looked around as though searching for something. "Zira, what is it?" Kale asked, his voice tinged with concern. She glanced at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of wonder and hesitation. I think I've found something. Or perhaps something has found me." Kale didn't say anything, but he followed her lead, staying by her side as she made her way deeper into the forest. The trees were thick, and the air was dense with the scent of earth and moss. Every step they took felt more significant, like they were walking toward a fate neither of them fully understood. Zira's instincts told her that this was more than a simple journey. It was a turning point. After what felt like hours, they came upon a clearing. At the center stood a large stone structure, half hidden by the overgrown vegetation. The stone walls seemed ancient, and something about the place felt like a forgotten relic from a different time. Zira approached the structure cautiously, her heart racing in her chest. She ran her fingers across the surface of the stone, feeling the rough texture beneath her fingertips. It was as if the building was calling to her, pulling her in. Kale stepped forward, sensing her unease. "What is this place?" he asked quietly. "I'm not sure," Zira replied, her voice trembling. "But it feels important. Like it's meant for me." As if to answer her, the ground beneath them rumbled slightly, and the stone doors of the structure creaked open. A blast of cool air rushed out, carrying with it an ancient energy that seemed to swirl around them. Zira stepped forward, instinctively pulling Kale along with her. The doors opened wider, revealing an expansive chamber beyond. In the center of the room stood a stone pedestal, bathed in soft light from an unknown source. Upon the pedestal rested a glowing crystal, its light pulsating with an almost lifelike rhythm. "This must be it," Zira whispered, her voice barely audible as she stepped closer to the pedestal. Her hand trembled as she reached out toward the crystal. Kale watched her closely, his protective instincts kicking in. "Be careful, Zira. We don't know what it is." But Zira was already too close. The moment her fingers brushed against the crystal, a surge of energy shot through her, sending a shockwave through her entire body. She gasped in surprise, the energy filling her like a tidal wave. For a moment, everything around her went white, and she felt as though time itself had stopped. When the light finally faded, she found herself standing alone in a vast, empty space, a void where nothing seemed to exist except for her. A soft voice echoed in the silence. "Zira, daughter of the fallen kingdom, you have chosen a path few would dare to take. Your heart, your choices, have led you here. You are the key to what comes next." Zira's breath caught in her throat. The voice was not one she recognized, but it felt familiar. The words stirred something deep within her, something she couldn't quite place. "You are no longer bound by your past. You are free to create a future, but the choices you make now will shape the fate of those who follow you. Will you lead them into a new dawn, or will you be lost to the darkness?" The voice faded, leaving Zira with a profound sense of clarity. She was more than a princess, more than a survivor. She was a leader who had the power to shape her future, and the future of those who believed in her. As the vision faded and the world returned to normal, Zira found herself back in the stone chamber. Kale stood beside her, looking at her with a mixture of concern and awe. "Zira, what just happened?" he asked. She took a deep breath, her mind racing with what she had experienced. I think I've just learned what I'm meant to do. I'm not running anymore. I'm not hiding from my past. I'm going to build something new, something better. For me, for my people, and for us." Kale's expression softened, his hand reaching for hers. "I'm with you, Zira. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." Zira looked at him, the weight of everything she had been through finally settling in a way that felt right. The journey had been long, and the challenges ahead would no doubt be many. But for the first time, she felt ready to face them. Not as a princess of the past, but as the woman who had chosen her own path. And with Kale by her side, she knew that nothing was impossible.